1996 Off-Road Racing Championship moved to Gaborone in Botswana for round 4 of the series, the Toyota 1000 Desert Race. This was the 4th consecutive year that the event has been based in the dry, diamond-rich country. Traditionally, the Toyota 1000 has always been a popular race, and with it counting towards the total Super Series 96, a large crowd gathered to witness the next round of the championship battle between reigning production champions RP Renica and navigator Robin Houghton, with hopefuls Neil Woolridge and Paul Vermaak in their Nissan Sani.
Ons tipe voertuig is meer gemaakt vir hierdie lange afstande. Ons het hom gebou vir hierdie langer, harder tipe bijeenkomste. Ons kan nie op hierdie kort bijeenkomste, omdat het geweldige zwaar voertuig is hierdie en streng gesproken nie eintlik gemaakt is om meer reisies te jaag nie.
Nissan Sani driver Neil Woolridge had a conservative strategy in mind.
Last year we lost four-wheel drive and we didn't finish. But this year we got a bit of a different strategy. We're not going to push as hard as what we normally do in the beginning and make sure we get to the end. I think if we can get to the end, we'll be there.
The motorcycles are split into 3 classes, and Kawasaki dominate the 200 class, while KTM holds a narrow advantage over Honda in the 250s. Multiple champion Alfie Cox seems to have things much his own way in the open class on his KTM 360.
You know, the 1000 is a race all on its own. I mean, we normally only race 500 kilometers. This time it's 1000, so it's 2 times the distance. And I believe always the race is won on the last day coming home. And just to get to the overnight stop, be fresh, you know, have no problems, and then the next day try and, you know, do the same.
There is intense rivalry between the Castrol KTM and the mighty Lesotho Office Equipment Honda team.
Yeah, everybody wants to beat Alfie. I'd like to beat Alfie, but my main thing is now is just to worry about Alex to win the championship. I must rather look to win the championship than I think that'll be the best.
Father and son crew Franz Czepik Sr. and Jr. have a narrow advantage over single-seater drivers Richard Carolyn and former circuit racer Marius Burain in the specials category.
You know, we're running a smaller motor, we're running Class B, 2-litre class, but if the sand gets very thick, we're going to battle a bit on power. The motor we've got is also very peaky. It's got its maximum horsepower around about 8,000 RPM, which is quite high. And it hasn't got too much low down, so we'll have to change a lot of gears. But hopefully we'll get it floating on top of the sand, and hopefully there are some nice long straights.
Vickers van Deventer and Christo van der Merwe dominate their respective classes in the spectacular quad category, which could be described as a Yamaha benefit category.
Well, hier is amper vir party mense 'n riller, die sand. Dis harde werk hierdie. Ek geniet dit, hoe harder en hoe tyre, hoe beter is my, hoe verder, hoe lekkerder is dit. Maar ek gaan hierdie keer nie so my kop my laat verloor nie. Ek gaan stadiger ry. Ek het nie niks om te bewys om so vinnig te jaag hierdie keer. Ek my fiets spaar. My fiets gaan oor 'n week gaan na Portugal toe, gaan daar ry, so ek my fiets spaar. Dis die belangrikste vir my die stadium.
There are 3 Breckel brothers who compete in off-road racing, Mark, Paul and Peter. We spoke to Paul about their hobby.
It takes a hell of a lot of effort from us. I mean, preparing the bikes and that sort of thing, it's a lot of time consumed and money. Very expensive riding a quad. I break down all the time. I'm burning my bike out every single race. I've only finished one this year. Planning on finishing this one.
One of the first riders to tackle the 30-kilometer time trial, which determined Friday's starting order, was Billy Kutsia on his unusual Polaris, one of only 2 non-Yamahas in the field. Route marking proved to be confusing, and amongst those who lost a lot of time were Kevin Pereira and race favourite Van Deventer. Recent unseasonal rains ensured that competitors had to keep an eye open for mud. Most riders opted for the cautious approach and bypassed the mud rather than risk getting bogged down, but Peter Breckel threw caution to the wind and blasted straight through. Quickest of all, though, was Paul Breckel on the Brasco Refrigeration Yamaha, who simply mowed through both the grass and the mud. Christo van der Merwe also lost time by getting lost and was second to Shane Dreers in the 200cc class. Hidden dongas and painful thorn bushes were other obstacles that riders had to contend with, and with over 900 kilometers still to go, no one was taking any chances. It certainly was an unusual finishing order as the Breckel brothers found themselves filling the top 3 places ahead of Paul Martin's Honda, Adrian High and Van Deventer. With Errol Dalton back in the saddle after breaking his leg in a jet ski accident prior to the Barbaspan 500 race, the Lesotho Office Equipment Honda team was back up to its full strength of 5 riders and was hoping for a good result. Following Dalton on the time trial were 250 champion Graham McLaughlin, Alan Julian, Grant Bloomfield on their CR500s and Lance Trethewey on a 250. Former 500 class champion Rian Farikak has adapted well to his smaller PD Motorcycles Honda CR125 and was charging. However, it was Wayne Farmer who emerged as quickest of the 200 class, that with his Kawasaki KDX 200. Motocrosser Gary Peterson made a rare off-road racing appearance with a Honda CR500 run under the Breckel Brothers Brasco refrigeration banner. Consistent performances have become a trademark of Ulrich Moray, and his KTM 360 led the KTM team onto the time trial. Following him was Nelspruit rider Marco Cavina on another 360, whose style made him a favourite with the local fans. One of the fastest young talents around at the moment is the hard-riding AGA Panasonic Pro Action Castrol KTM 250 star Daryl Curtis. After a 2-year layoff from off-road competition, Willie Island teamed up with Mark Myron to share a most unusual bike.
This mad friend Mark Myron, he forced me into it, you know, and it's also been a little bit of an itch. I need to get out of town and just go mad again.
There's this monster riverbed out here.
The US Steel Fuchs lubrication Huseberg certainly attracted a great deal of attention.
It's a Huseberg. It's a motorcycle that was produced from 2 brothers who left Husqvarna, and they went and designed their own motorcycle 4 years ago. And the same motorcycle, the last 2 years, has won the 500cc World Championship motocross event with Joel Smets aboard. And it's a very, very fast motorcycle. It's a 4-valve 500cc. It's the same weight as the CR500, KX500 of today, 108 kilograms. It's very reliable, and we're going to give it a good run today and tomorrow and see how it lasts.
Curtis emerged from the time trial with the quickest time ahead of teammate Cox and the storming Peterson. Cavina served notice of his intentions by recording the 4th fastest time ahead of a Honda Onslaught. After a season's layoff, winners of the event in 1993, John Lambert and Eric Scholz, were hoping to repeat the feat this year in their newly rebuilt and modified Digidor Porsche Raceco. The tight time trial route provided little room for overtaking, and traffic jams became commonplace. Those unfortunate enough to be caught behind slower vehicles had to contend with the resultant dust clouds, which caused some navigational errors. Reigning special vehicle category champions Greg Harvey and Lionel Acton lost this event last year by a very small margin. They were hoping for a good starting position, but they fell foul of the route marking and lost a couple of minutes. Another team which favoured its chances was that of Stanley Illman and Franz Stungel in the high-tech Tiptronic gearbox-equipped and very powerful Porsche Raceco. Well, it may look like an old Beetle, but in the back of Jacques Hubert's steed lurks a turbocharged Volvo engine, complete with Audi gearbox and 4-wheel drive. Once again, Kasi Kutsia and Richard Leek were at the helm of Team Toyota's 10-year-old but still very rapid Hilux Turbo, which is affectionately known as Fred. Bearing in mind that there were still 2 days of racing and over 900 kilometers ahead of them, the Chefek started cautiously, staying on the track at all times so as to keep well away from the tire-shredding thorns that characterize the Botswana flora. Mike Redden and Wyatt Joseph have opened a few eyes with their performances in the near-standard 4.6 Land Rover TDI, and there is talk of other manufacturers fielding turbo diesels in the near future. Rob Walk won the 94 event in a single-seater raceco. This season he has Greg Wiebel aboard as navigator and would dearly like to win again. Gaborone crew Rashid Noble and Steve Cooper had the advantage of local knowledge, but it didn't help them and they were destined to start a lowly 39th. Hard work after rolling on the last event saw former champions Richard Schilling and Ashley Thorne set a brisk pace in the huge Motortech V8 raceco. Nick Harper and Richard Hill found themselves holding up local hero JJ Volmeran's similar raceco, and as soon as it was convenient, pulled off to let him through. Courteous people, these off-roaders. After finishing off his new car in the early hours of the morning and then driving straight through to Botswana, Bucks Carolyn and navigator Kenny Scholthammer immediately set about putting the automatic lubrication equipment Porsche Raceco through its paces.
The Roof and the Desert are the two most important races, so to win these two, they're the most prestige events, and hopefully we can attract some sponsors. We're looking for sponsors all the time, and off-road racing is growing at the moment. With the Total Super Series is going to be fantastic, so this is a growing sport.
Volmerans recorded the fastest time, but the big surprise was the performance of Marius Burain in the nimble Golf-powered Mighty Mag single-seater, which claimed third. Friday's route saw the field head northwest at a designated service point and then complete another loop of 250 kilometers before the overnight stop. An early start saw teams gather at the start before the sun had risen, and despite the chill, some spectators were brave enough to wear shorts. The dubious honour of starting first went to Volmerans, with the rest headed by Schilling following at 30-second intervals. Off-road racing cars don't afford much protection against the elements, so it was with trepidation that crews approached a water splash on the old Lobatse road soon after the start. The last thing they needed was wet and cold overalls so early in the race before the sun came up and offered some warmth. With 2 days of hard racing ahead of them, competitors also needed to nurse their vehicles if they were to reach the checkered flag back at Gaborone. By the time the quad races were due to set off, the sun was beginning to show its welcome face, and the Breckles received some last-minute encouragement at the head of the queue.
Feeling a bit nervous. Couldn't really sleep last night, you know. But I think it's going to help me a lot, you know, psychologically today. Won't have the dust, and no Vickers is behind me, you know, for a while. I don't know. Maybe the whole way through. Never know.
Aggressive getaways by Paul and Peter on their Brasco refrigeration Yamahas amused the local constabulary, and one wonders whether they were calling for reinforcements or just telling their friends. With the motorcycles due to start after the quads, there was time to reflect on the previous day's racing.
Well, I had a good run. I had no dust. I was the first bike away, but I kept overshooting turns. I thought the markers were too close to the corners. And I guess I rode harder to try and make up time, but I'm happy to be third, and I'm actually glad I'm starting where I am.
While the two-wheel brigade were still in the starting blocks, the leading cars were making steady progress through the long riverbed section, and already there had been casualties. Schilling had parked his raceco with gearbox problems, and Colin Frankenberg retired his 4-sticks Range Rover after hitting a tree. Reinecker had moved up to second, but had Nardis Alberts and Warren Klaassen chasing him in the Rapsa raceco. But with few overtaking opportunities, Alberts had no option but to hold station and swallow sand. Italians Derek Pinoy and Craig Jackson had started ahead of Alberts, who got by when they had wrong slotted earlier. It was a bad start to the day for Marius Burain, who found himself battling to select gears, and he was losing ground rapidly to his bigger engined rivals. There were no such problems for the Chepex, who had the peaky Porsche motor in full cry as they floated the Class BV Motors Epson Raceco across the sand in the fast sections. Even though the Nissan Sani was coming under pressure from Stanley Illman and Franz Stungel in the Raceco, Neil Woolridge and Paul Vermaak were maintaining a steady pace rather than risk hitting a rock or getting bogged down. Dry riverbeds are every racer's nightmare, especially after recent rains when there are pools of water which could have submerged rocks and other obstacles hidden in them. Navigating in an off-road racing car is not an easy task. Just watch how Richard Leake is pointing out obstacles and giving directions to Kasi Kutsia as they guide the Castrol Toyota Hilux through the treacherous terrain. Once out of the riverbed, drivers were on the constant lookout for wandering cattle as they powered down thorn-lined tracks and negotiated narrow gates. Contrary to his misgivings about a racing car that had never turned a wheel before the race, Carolyn had made up a lot of ground and had closed up on Kutsia. His only problem so far had been an overheating gearbox in the river. Paul Breckel's tenure at the head of the quad pack was proving more difficult than he anticipated, and a heavy fall, which didn't do much for his ego, kept the local population amused. Despite winding himself in the tumble, he was able to get mobile without too much delay. It had taken Van Deventer on his Jojo Tanks Yamaha Banshee less than 80 kilometers to move from 6th place to 2nd, and he was catching Breckel rapidly. Before the end of the riverbed, he'd regained his customary position at the front of the field. Mark Breckel had passed his brother Peter to hold on to 3rd spot, but as expected was losing ground to the flying Lichtenberg bomber. Having a constantly variable transmission proved to be an advantage in the sandy conditions, and it wasn't long before Kutsia had moved into the top 6 with the torquey single-cylinder Polaris. Kevin Pereira, on the other hand, found the narrow power band of his twin-cylinder Yamaha Banshee hard work. Nevertheless, was flying considering the fact that he set off in 11th place. Delighted shouts from the spectators heralded the arrival of the two-wheeled category leaders. It was brilliant stuff as Peterson and Curtis fought an awesome duel in the river. Both were hanging everything on the cable, and one wondered how long they would be able to maintain the pace. Not far behind them was the super smooth Cox, who always looks a lot slower than his style suggests. Pro Action KTM's newest star Marco Cavina was making a good impression on the established hotshots, especially considering the fact that this was only his 2nd desert race and he was holding a narrow 4th ahead of Alex Val's Antilex Dairy Castrol KTM. Kevin Fisher, who hails from Honeydew, was next along on his Montage Team Pro-Am KTM and was being chased hard by 200cc class leader Clayton Ensign aboard the FMF Racing Kawasaki KDX 200. Wildman Willie Island was by far the fastest rider through the dry riverbed, and after less than 80 kilometers of racing, he had already made up an incredible 21 places. Meanwhile, out in front of the car field, it was still local driver JJ Wolmerans leading comfortably. Local knowledge or not, he was still driving quicker than anyone else, but not for long. Soon after the service stop, they were limping home with a blown motor. By now, the field was starting to sort itself out, and Reiniger and Houghton had taken over the lead of the production vehicle category after Coetzee and Leek lost 10 minutes with a puncture. When Wolmerans retired, the Bankman Toyota found itself leading overall. Finding the route through the dense thorn bushes was not always easy, though. Another crew running well were Alberts and Klaassen in the automatic Raceco, but they were under pressure from Italian Derek Pinoy, who's regarded by many as one of the best off-road racers on the scene at the moment. Despite having been stuck in second gear for almost 100 kilometers, Marius Berain was still running in the top 6 and holding on to third in the now rather decimated special vehicle category. Behind the lightweight single-seater, the Chefex were battling through the twisty tracks and were hampered by having a very narrow power band which allowed Woolrich and Vermaak to close up. Before the service point, Elman and Stungel had joined fellow Raceco drivers Harvey and Harper on the retirement list. The two-wheelers also had a high rate of attrition, and Peterson had pulled a bit of distance from Curtis. Even though he held a handy lead, he didn't let up the pace, and when he came upon Van Deventer on the leading quad, he simply took a beeline through the bush to pass him. Kalahari Sands can be very unforgiving, and next to find themselves stranded a long, long way from home were locals, Noble and Cooper. There was a close battle for second in the bike category, but the relatively young Daryl Curtis on the AGA Panasonic Pro-Action Castrol KTM was still managing to hold off the maestro Cox, who has almost a decade more experience. Cox has competed in several overseas events, and the Springbok has always acquitted himself well. What great shots from cameraman Trevor Taylor. Vowles was showing great maturity as he rode at a controlled pace behind the leading trio without allowing himself to get embroiled in the race for second. A very sensible approach for a 22-year-old, and rather than take risks, he picked his moments to overtake cars. Emergency services were kept busy as the race took its toll. Errol Dalton, Alan Julien, Anas Buerta and Anton Hoffman were all hospitalized after crashing heavily. Fortunately, though, none of the injuries turned out to be very serious. The 4.5-litre Bankman Toyota Land Cruiser was sounding glorious as Reiniger swung it down the narrow tracks en route to the finish and the overnight stop. Next up, and some 4 minutes behind, was Pinoy's Quickfoot Raceco. For the time being, he was content to lead the special vehicle class rather than challenge for the outright lead. Berain's gear selection problems were getting worse, and he overshot corners as he fished for suitable gears. Fortunately, the small Mighty Mag was so quick through the tight sections that he quickly made up for any mistakes. With low-lying branches bouncing off the windscreen protection bars, Coetzee was driving with verve in a vain attempt to make up the 10 minutes he'd lost earlier with a puncture. But no matter how hard he tried, he just wasn't making up ground. There were no problems for former Roof of Africa Rally bike winner Neil Woolrich as the Nissan Turbo ran reliably all day. There was a nasty scare for Alberts and Klaassen when their Raceco suddenly lost oil pressure and they stopped immediately to investigate. Bucks Carolyn drove past and moved up another position as he gave a thumbs up, asking whether they needed any assistance. There was not much help anyone could offer, though. Richard Carolyn had fallen back slightly, but as single-seater drivers are always at a disadvantage when it comes to difficult terrain, he could be forgiven. At the overnight stop, Reiniger had built up a lead of 3 minutes over the Sani, while Berain's heroic efforts saw him holding third place and leading the special vehicle category. Coetzee and Leek were still 10 minutes behind in fourth place, and there were no surprises when the results were posted. The fact that there was no impound at the overnight stop meant that service crews had more than enough time to attend to any problems that may have been picked up.
Hierdie tweede helfte geweldig vinnig.
ander dele weer geweldig stadig. Dis omtrent 30, ek sou sê 40 kilos wat ons omtrent gemiddelde spoed van 25 km/h gedoen het. Baie digte bos en baie swaar sand. So ek dink môre gaan dit nog baie slegter wees die pad daar, want na die klomp voertuie oor is gaan hy baie slegter wees.
There was a big surprise when the first motorcycle appeared, for it was none other than Alex Vowles. The fast pace had taken its toll on man, machine and animal. Both Curtis and Cox had seized their motors, so it was Cavino who followed Vowles home ahead of Honda riders Trethewey and Van Niekerk, as well as Fisher's KTM. Peterson had completed the day, but was a long way adrift in 6th place.
The only problems that I had with some of the cars, the cars can't get out your way because the route is so tight. And you tend to stay behind them for about 10 k's, 15 kilometers, and just suck in their dirt, and then eventually you get by. But otherwise it was a nice ride, no problems.
Gary, you're looking rather battered?
Yeah, I had an accident, not due to my fault, stupidity, but just after their last fuel stop, about 70 k's out, I think I had about a minute or 2 minute lead and I hit a car. I don't remember anything. I think my arm is, well, they say my arm's broken. And I think that's the end of my race.
Despite seizing his motor, Cox did make it back, even if he had to stop a car to tow his bike back into life. But he'd lost over half an hour and finished just ahead of Van Deventer's leading quad. When Van Deventer says he's taking it easy, you know the word doesn't exist in his vocabulary. He finished a whopping 1 hour and 8 minutes ahead of Coetzee after Peter and Mark Breckel had crashed out.
Ja, is harde werk. Jy moet 'n pas kan ry. Ek kan myself ook nie uitbrand. Ek spaar myself 'n Portugal leg. En daai manne, dat wys waar word daar by die wortels grawe. Nee, ek vat dit maar ek môre gaan ek dit baie kalm vat. Baie ek die fiets spaar. So ek gaan dit môre kalm vat.
With the day's racing behind them, it was time to set up camp, light the fires and catch up on the trials and tribulations of fellow competitors before trying to get in a good night's sleep. The final day of racing saw competitors follow a reversal of the previous day's 420-kilometre route to the finish at Gaborone Showgrounds. Once again, it was a pre-dawn start, but only 26 cars of the 50 that started were still in the contest. With a short, by desert race standards, 420-kilometre blast ahead of them, Reinecker in the Vanklin Toyota Hilux led Woolridge away from the start, and the race for line honours was on. Traditionally, the real racing starts on the last leg, when there's nothing to lose and everything to gain. With no servicing restrictions at the overnight stop, Burain was able to repair his gear linkage and hoped to maintain his special category lead. By the time the sun had risen, Reinecker's lead was being eroded by Woolridge and Vermaak, whose Nissan Sani is one of the most powerful cars in off-road racing. Normally being first on the road is difficult as there are no tracks to follow, but this was the same route as the previous day, so tracks were clearly marked and both drivers were throwing caution to the wind as they churned up the Kalahari sand. Coetzee and Leek are fighters and set about reducing their 10-minute deficit. All they needed was for the leaders to wrong slot or get bogged down and they would be in with a shout for victory. An early problem for Burain saw Pinoy and Jackson heading the special vehicle class, and they were charging along merrily and full of confidence in their car, which so far hadn't missed a beat. Burain's problem hadn't been serious and he was soon back in full flight and gaining on Pinoy. Apart from being passed by Pinoy, Coetzee and Leek had also got ahead, and he was now fifth on the road. But the dark horse was the Raceco, driven by the Chepex. They're experienced racers and have been racing the same car, which has proved to be very reliable for 3 seasons. With an hour in hand over his opposition, Vickers van Deventer on the Jojo Tanks Yamaha Banshee was looking very relaxed. Behind him, his rivals, headed by Billy Coetzee on the lone Polaris, were fairly well spread out. As usual, the bikes were spectacular, and despite this close call, Vowles looked as though he was well in control at the head of the field. Still holding second was the smooth-riding 23-year-old Kavina, who by this time had been expected to crumble under the pressure. Less than a minute had separated Trethewey from Van Niekerk and Fisher at the start, and Trethewey was also determined to keep pace with the leaders, but lost a few precious seconds by overshooting. Van Niekerk churned up the desert on his Honda 125. Alfie Cox showed why he's regarded as the best rider in the country and hauled through the field to claim 5th place by outfoxing his fellow KTM rider Kevin Fisher as they risked the thorns by attempting to find the shortest route possible between the unforgiving trees. Behind Wayne Farmer, who was second in the 200 class, Johan Smith was running well in 8th place on his unsponsored Honda 250. One of the few Yamaha-mounted riders was Terry Waters, and he was doing a superb job in holding a very narrow third in the 200 class, ahead of his Kawasaki-mounted class rival Adrian Hofmeyer. Next up in the 200 class was Peter Milan on yet another Kawasaki KDX. Out front, things were really hotting up, and Woolridge had managed to get ahead of the Toyota as they reached the service point. But Reineke's turnaround time was better. He rejoined with a slender lead, only to lose valuable seconds stuck behind a cow. Woolridge had now shown his cards and kept up the pressure on the long far straights, which had cars running at maximum speed and outrunning the helicopter. Driving a car at top speed over soft sand is hard work. Coetzee recorded speeds of around the 180 kilometers per hour region in the turbo Castrol Toyota Hilux. But he was closing slightly on the leaders, and the stage was being set for a thrilling finale. There was also a terrific battle developing for the special vehicle honours as Pinoy and Jackson were working hard to keep Burain's nimble single-seater projectile at bay. At each marshal point, Burain checked the gap to Pinoy and found that he was closing steadily. Pinoy, on the other hand, had no idea how far Burain was behind and had no choice but to drive as hard as possible. Richard Carolyn in the lubrication equipment race car had picked up places in the morning and found himself well placed after the Chepeks had retired their V-Motors Epson race car with a broken gearbox. But his race was to end soon after this bush-clearing exercise when his gearbox casing split open. After their earlier problems with a lost sump plug, which was repaired after the retiring Volmerons had towed them into the service area, Alberts and Klaassen had made up a lot of time and were clearly in a hurry. Also handily placed was the Porsche race car of Hilton Laurie and David Coombs. Some deft driving saw them in contention for a top 3 Class A placing. There'd been a big scare for Rob Walk and Greg Wiebel when the front of the race car's floor pan had come loose at high speed and acted as a shovel. That and other niggling problems had cost them over 2 hours. Despite battling to follow the route, Toyota Hilux crew Schumi and Karel van Vuren were dominating proceedings in Class E for near-standard 4-wheel drive vehicles. Redden and Joseph had been assisted by the Van Vurens when they stopped to right the Four Sticks Land Rover after putting it on its side earlier in the day, and then Redden overshot the same corner in sympathy. Mark Laurie and Warren Morton had a character-building race so far and were almost last, running just ahead of Barbaspan Motor Club members and local farmers Yanni and Chris Visser, whose old Toyota Land Cruiser seemed ready to expire at any moment. A seized motor had almost sidelined Van Deventer, who, thinking his race was over, had a half-an-hour nap before he was woken up by someone offering to tow him in an effort to restart, and he was able to rejoin. Alex Vowles and Marco Kavina were still going at it hammer and tongs. Both were on the ragged edge of control, and to make matters worse, Vowles' Unterlegs Dairy KTM had a broken side stand spring, while Kavina found himself running off the road at times. With the last of the Breckles having retired earlier in the day, Adrian High was holding a worthy third in the quad category behind Coetzee's very effective McPherson strut-equipped Polaris. Sixth in the little four-wheeler class and finding the thick sand tough going was Kevin Pereira. Soft sand provides motorcyclists with the ultimate test of fitness, and Lance Trafui was still holding third place and had passed the 7th place quad of Francois Fenter. The pace of the race changed dramatically as the leaders tackled the last leg back to Gaborone. Reiniger and Houghton had lost their lead after a rear differential failure, and this left the jubilant Nissan Sani crew with a healthy lead over Coetzee and Leek. It was with an almost win-or-nothing attitude that Coetzee tackled the riverbed for the last time. There was a new leader in the special vehicle class as Bahrain's never-give-up attitude had seen him pass Pinoy and Jackson with a mere 100 kilometres of the race left. Bahrain was showing all the style of a championship-winning single-seater ace, which he almost was in his circuit racing days. Pinoy and Jackson had also benefited from the Bankton Toyota's problem, and they were holding 4th place after passing Reiniger, while he and Houghton were busy removing the rear prop shaft, which left the Toyota with front-wheel drive only. Needless to say, progress was slow and tedious as the front wheels dragged 2 tons of Land Cruiser along. Vowles and Cavino were still engaged in their brilliant all-out scrap at the front of the motorcycle category and were in sight of each other as they blasted down the dry river. But soon after the riverbed, Cavino picked up a puncture and was forced to concede defeat, a heartbreaking end to a thrilling race. Cox's tremendous fight back from a 30-minute deficit in the morning had brought him up to 3rd place, but he was still 15 minutes behind. The last obstacle before the finish was the flooded Lobatse Road a few kilometres from the end, and it provided a convenient opportunity for Woolridge and Vermaak to wash their Nissan Sani before reaching the checkered flag. The Castrol Toyota Hilux managed a good impression of an offshore powerboat as Coetzee kept the pedal to the metal and waded through. Everything kept going right for the Nissan Sani, and Woolridge and Vermaak cruised home to score their most important off-road race victory to date. Had it not been for Coetzee and Leek's puncture on the first day, which cost him 10 minutes, the race could have been rather different as they came home almost exactly 10 minutes behind. A delighted Bahrain hung on to claim the special vehicle class and 3rd overall ahead of Pinoy and Coombs, while Reiniger and Houghton survived to take 5th. Almost an hour behind Reiniger, Laurie and Coombs took the flag, and they were almost an hour ahead of the Class E winning Toyota Hilux of the Van Vierens.
We had a game plan where we said we would take it easy from the start and not go mad and just hang in with the guys, and we were 3 minutes behind at the overnight, which is just what we wanted. And then from today we pushed hard. We caught RP just before the refuel and got past him, and it's been plain sailing since then.
As Reiniger came into finish, so did motorcycle winner Alex Vowles on the Antilex Dairy KTM. But there was a last-minute scare in store as he had to avoid Houghton's suddenly opened door. Alfie Cox eventually claimed 2nd place, with Lance Trafui taking 3rd ahead of Kevin Fisher, who passed the luckless Cavino near the end. Von Deventer cruised home to win and pick up an extra 5,000 Rand for winning his class in all the Total Super Series 96 events held to date. Runner-up was Billy Coetzee on the lone Polaris, while Johannesburg Yamaha's Christo van der Merwe maintained his 100% winning record in the 200 class with a fine 8th place. Round 5 of the South African Off-Road Championship is the Settler 400, which takes place near Port Elizabeth on the 9th and the 10th of August.